Hi guys.
Hi there.
Hey, I was a bit nervous until now. I think I feel easier now because I found out that I'm not the only traditional finance guy here. Joe has admitted that you consider yourself a reform banker?
Yeah.
Okay.
I used to trade at the hedge fund at Morgan Stanley.
Okay, so I don't feel too lonely, and it's
I'm the lonely one.
right. You are a completely DeFi guy, right?
I'm the DGen.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if I don't understand something, Joe, can you translate it for me? If we end up speaking different languages, right?
That's kind
Okay.
of my specialty, so we're good.
Okay. So to begin with, I think I would like to lay out the context of what we were talking about in terms of what it means to have a reserve currency and what does it mean in today's world. And I think maybe young people, a lot of young people in the audience may not care what's going on in the world, but I think it's very difficult not to notice what's going on, what has been going on in the world over the last 3 years or so. I would even say go a little bit further back to maybe COVID. And maybe COVID started the whole thing. But we have seen a lot of disruptions all around the world, and it started with geopolitical or trade. It started out with a trade war between the U.S. and China with Donald Trump's 1.0, and then it's escalated into much more frictional geopolitical tensions, and now we have seen the tariff situation, but also because of the trade war, I think what we have seen is that particularly the country where the USD came from, which has been used as the reserve currency, so to speak, for many, many years. Um, the U.S. has been undergoing a trade deficit, and it's understandable because the U.S. is a consumer market, and everyone else in the world is making products for the U.S. market, and so now we have seen a very high level of trade deficit in the U.S. And so when COVID happened, we and even before that, we saw a lot of quantitative easing from the U.S., meaning printing out money, and so then we ended up right at COVID. In addition to the trade deficit, we also have disruptions in the supply chain, and so inflation was running rampant all over the place, and so as a result of inflation, high inflation all over the world, we have the U.S. Jacking up interest rates in order to cool inflation down. So with that, I think, and not to mention the fact that now, when after the trade war began to show itself, we have had military conflicts as well in different parts of the world. So needless to say, I think we have been living in a very disruptive period of time. Although in the meanwhile, I think also another disruption that many of us here know is in the way of technology. Technology has been advancing very far, I would say, in the last few years, particularly with artificial intelligence and everything that's going on in the Web3 space. So now we have seen the USD as a world reserve currency being challenged to some extent. It has been challenged by gold for many years now. And we'll talk about gold in a little bit. But Bitcoin has been mopped up, so to speak, by governments all over the world, not least the U.S. also. Well, the U.S. Didn't start building up the Bitcoin reserve other than from confiscating from the criminals. But now we have a situation where then the U.S. is probably holding the largest reserve of Bitcoins among the countries. Correct me if I'm wrong. I mean,
I believe so.
okay. Other than, I think Satoshi Nakamoto is probably holding the biggest amount, but we don't even know who he is or where he is. So in your view, do you think Bitcoin is a contender to challenge the USD to some extent, or it can challenge the USD to a larger extent in the future?
Yeah, so my take is that Bitcoin has some of the characteristics of a reserve currency, like it's impossible to fake, it's very difficult to attack, you can't just go and print more of it, right? And so from that perspective, it's very good. If you think about like all of the things that you just mentioned, like government can be good or it can be bad, right? All of the evils.
I think governments are all bad.
You think they're all bad? I think
politicians, actually, not government, politicians.
Politicians, right? But if you think about, like, for example, personally, my opinion is like the U.S. invasion of Iraq was unjustified, right? And if you think about, like, if the U.S. government had to go around to everyone and collect donations to fund this war, right? Do you think it would have happened? Like, definitely not. And so clearly, like, if we're trying to say, like, if the USD now is the de facto reserve currency, there is already a problem with the status quo. And so clearly we can do better. And so then the question is, like, how do we do better, right? And so I think from the perspective of making it that governments cannot arbitrarily weaponize their own currency against their citizens and against other countries, I think from this perspective, Bitcoin has some very interesting properties. It shares those same properties with gold. But the difference with Bitcoin is you don't have this issue of physical storage, right? It's like kind of better than gold in a way, right? But then from another perspective, you could say it's not scalable. So I think if you want Bitcoin to be a contender for the USD, as the world reserve currency, really what we need to accomplish is the ability to use Bitcoin at scale. And as of right now, that's not happening on the layer 1 of Bitcoin. It's happening on, you know, other platforms such as Solana, such as layer 2s and centralized exchanges and custodial services.
When you are saying usage, are you referring to the usage of Bitcoin as a mode of payment?
Yeah.
Okay. So
Yes.
it should be used more in the retail crowd rather than the institutions.
It does not necessarily have to be used in retail or broadly used. It's just like if you think of gold as a reserve currency, as many people do, right, for like thousands of years. Gold has some underlying utility, right? It has some non-money use case, right? And so I think for Bitcoin, it's important that it has that non-money use case, like in terms of like something else that it can be useful for, or it's important that it has a money and a reserve currency use case. Like there has to be more than one use for it. Otherwise, it's kind of like arbitrary, right? Like why Bitcoin? Why not like, why don't we make our own version of Bitcoin? Or, you know what I mean?
We'll get to that question later on.
Sure, yeah.
Joe, what do you think?
So my take is, at least for next 10 years, I don't think Bitcoin should be the reserve currency. I think for many reasons, but then something that I can mention here is the first, liquidity. Not enough people have Bitcoin at this moment. They have to accumulate first to make it reserve currency. And it has to be widely distributed and available for everyone.
That's not going to happen. I don't think that. Maybe you can educate me as to how that can happen, because the institutions are mopping it up.
Yeah,
And
so I mean that's what I'm saying. So I don't think it's gonna happen like anytime
right.
soon.
So if you're saying in the next 10 years, I would imagine it's going to be shrinking to a minuscule percentage of accessibility amongst the retail users.
I don't know if it really matters for the retail participation, but then the government needs to, I guess, hold those Bitcoin and then also use the Bitcoin as a, like a currency between the governments. That I think that is the important aspect.
Okay.
I mean, the counter argument I could make to that is like, we used to back currency with gold when almost nobody held their own gold, right? Like, the gold was all centralized by governments in the time of war into their centralized vaults. And eventually they debased the currency, but at that time, only the government held gold and currency was still backed by gold, right? But what it does show is the problem of centralization, right? And so if Bitcoin becomes a reserve currency, it's good in comparison to the USD as it stands today because it's harder to weaponize. But if it's just like sitting in the hands of governments, then they're going to fractionalize it, and then they're going to have fractional reserve banking based on Bitcoin, and you're just going to recreate the existing financial system. And so that's why, like you said, it's very important that we have distribution. It's important that many people hold Bitcoin and many people use Bitcoin so that it has some competitive use case outside of just a reserve currency.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah.
Of course, our session is about Bitcoin, but because you mentioned gold, I think let's give it a couple of minutes. I think the direction in which we're heading is back to when, especially with countries like China building up their gold reserve, and other countries too, the U.S. as well, are now going back to rebuilding their gold reserve. As a matter of fact, China has always been building up their gold reserve. So I feel like because of the USD's dominance politically and financially all over the world, the challenge will come from other places like, let's say, China, who will find a way to destabilize or discredit the USD fiat by setting up a gold-backed currency. It may be the renminbi, it may be something else, it may be, I don't know, they do have their own token, their own crypto, right? And so would gold be in a much more viable position to become the world's reserve currency rather than Bitcoin?
Yeah. In terms of the assets for the government, I think that's better. I think use case because, like I said, widely accepted, widely distributed. I think that's really key component. But at the same time, I think it's very difficult for the government to also hold and prove those reserves, whereas Bitcoin is quite very easy. Yeah.
I mean, I could just make my point with one simple question. How much gold did you carry to Vietnam on your way here through immigration? I'm guessing maybe 0, maybe like a ring or something, but not much, right? But like, how much Bitcoin? Well, nobody would know and nobody could prove how much you do or don't have, right? If they want to try to confiscate it, you can store it in your mind, in your brain, right? So Bitcoin has some properties that are far superior to gold. If you asked me, could I distribute gold to 1 billion people faster or Bitcoin to a billion people? Bitcoin is way faster to propagate. If you asked me, what is the settlement time for like gold versus Bitcoin when we have to physically transport gold and our way of commerce now is primarily digital, I'd say gold is totally useless for this use case.
If I may differ a little bit, I agree with the last 2 points that you mentioned in terms of real-time transactions and in terms of portability, of course. But I am carrying some gold on my phone right now. and it's a lot more than I carry my Bitcoin. I have a fraction of Bitcoin on my phone, but nowadays with technology, I can basically sell my gold, buy Bitcoin at the same time on two different exchanges. But you're right, there will be a lag in terms of time. So I won't be able to do it in real time, but I will be able to do it in, let's say, a half an hour's time.
But you're talking about like, you're not actually talking about physical gold in your possession, right? You're talking about paper gold, right? Which is kind of the same as like owning Bitcoin on an exchange or something, right? If you can hold Bitcoin natively, that is a very different story to just like holding paper gold, right? Because it is truly in your possession. Nobody can take it away from you. You are the only one who can decide how you want to spend it, right? I think so. There are some properties of Bitcoin that make it superior for gold as a standard for us to, I guess, move towards when obviously our fiat currencies are all very broken right now. So if we look at the question here, like, should Bitcoin be a reserve currency, right? I would say the answer is, if we're comparing it to our current reserve currencies of the world, yes. But is it capable of doing that right now? Probably no, and the main reason is because the Bitcoin blockchain is not scalable. And so if we pursue scaling solutions, then I think we unlock this potential to see Bitcoin function in that way. But obviously, it's not the sort of thing that can happen overnight.
When you say scalable, do you mean to come out with like offsprings of Bitcoin?
No. So what I mean is right now, Bitcoin's network can process about 7 transactions per second. That's obviously not very much, right? So if you consider like, Visa, MasterCard, they're probably doing like, I don't know, 70,000. So, only a 10,000x required for Bitcoin to be competitive for payments. That's quite unlikely, right? But if we have ways using cryptography and layer 2 scaling solutions, which are truly non-custodial in the sense that you as the end user can truly control that. And if we look at like upcoming proposals to upgrade Bitcoin, such as the OpCat proposal, this would enable such scaling solutions. Then it's possible for us to leverage scalable networks like Solana to improve the distribution. So Solana can do tens of thousands of transactions per second. So then it becomes possible for us to distribute Bitcoin widely enough that it could have this potential.
Now, my understanding is Bitcoin is finite. It doesn't have, you can't mine more than 21 million Bitcoins, and there are already 19 million or so in circulation, right?
Correct.
So is that, does that hamper any scalability or any distribution?
So one thing that might happen, right, is like, let's say the price of Bitcoin went to $1 billion per coin, right? Let's say. It only has 8 decimal places, right? You come to a situation where you cannot fractionalize the token enough to pay for something less than, $1, right? So maybe there is like a situation like that. But the solution to that is tokenization, right? We can fractionalize the underlying asset and tokenize it. So there are solutions to that. But if you're talking about using Bitcoin on the layer 1 chain natively, like, it's possible that it's not divisible enough. Right now it's fine. The price is not that high, relatively speaking, right? It's perfectly fine. But one of the properties of good money is divisibility. And Bitcoin, if the price went up too much, maybe the native underlying asset would not be divisible enough for micropayments.
Okay, may I pick your brain a little bit on the
Sure.
technical side? Now, because the price of Bitcoin right now would still allow it to be fractionalized
Sure.
to an extent where you can it still can be a mode of payment for small items. At which point do you, or can you calculate it out to determine that at that price or at that value, it's no longer feasible to fractionalize it?
Yeah, so that's obviously subjective, right? But think about like the bolivar or like other currencies that have hyperinflated, right? You end up with a situation where we end up with too many zeros at the end of the currency, and it becomes difficult to calculate the price of things. And then we rebase the currency by dividing by 1,000 or 10,000 or something, and then we end up with a new currency, right? Bitcoin is in this situation, it would be hyper deflation, not hyperinflation. So it would be the opposite problem. So we would need to add more zeros somehow, right? And we already have a way to do that. Like think about gold, right? We're not really down to the point of trading gold atoms, right? Like, because gold is not that expensive relative to its smallest unit of divisibility, right? But if it ever was, we would come up with a way to just split the atom, so to speak.
Yeah. So I've heard that there is a rumor that at one point the U.S. government may want to consider revaluing gold. Is that something that would be a challenger to Bitcoin in any way in terms of valuation?
I don't think so. I think this is something we discussed earlier. Even if we revalue the gold, we can approve if we really have the gold. And this is kind of the same argument that, let's say we have a $1 million US in our bank account. How can we prove we have a 1 million in bank account? I think it's the same. So I don't think it really matters.
Let's talk about other usages of Bitcoin other than it being the mode of payment or transactions. And I have recently come across the way MicroSeller and MicroStrategy has carried out their business strategy, and I have, although I vaguely understand the way it works because it has a lot of traditional finance features in their business model, but I can't imagine that it can be a sustainable business model going perpetually, because basically MicroStrategy they can issue new equity or new bonds all the time, and they can continue to buy up Bitcoin, and the price will continue to go up. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, no?
What's the difference between this and the U.S. Treasury?
Right. I was thinking of the way Tether works. We'll come around to USDT and USDC in a little bit, but aren't these self-fulfilling prophecies that?
If I were running the U.S. Treasury and I basically issued more bonds, printed more money, and I used that to buy gold, then suddenly I have two levers. I have the supply of the US dollar and the supply of gold, and I can sell one to buy the other. So I can engage in a two-way market manipulation. I believe strategy is quite similar to this. I can sell shares and I can buy or sell Bitcoin, right? So again, they have two levers that they can use. And they're basically leveraging the fact that the US is going to continue to print debt to unsustainable levels, to attack basically the fiat debt system to acquire more Bitcoin. Now, really the thing about whether or not that's sustainable is, can he acquire more debt? And will he get cold on his debt? If the answer is yes and no, then it can continue as long as people are willing to lend him money.
Yeah, I would say that compared to the U.S. government, maybe MicroStrategy has no chance. But what if the U.S. government decided to issue its own stable coin? and it will do the same thing as Tether or Circle do.
I don't think they have an incentive to do that, because that would require them telling you how much money they're printing. That would require them being open and transparent about how much they're issuing and to who and when, because it would all be on the blockchain. I don't think governments are actually interested in that level of transparency.
What about the concept of centralization? Because Bitcoin was invented with the decentralization feature as the main feature, correct? Apart from personal freedom and security in mind. So with certain governments trying to rein it in and legalize it on the one hand, but of course they are going to put a lot of rules and regulations around it. On the one hand, it's probably going to be a good thing, a better thing for users and for the market. But on the other hand, doesn't that defeat the purpose of decentralization to begin with?
I don't know if I understand the question correctly, but if the centralization like move forward or happens, the Bitcoin value is not going to be sustainable. I think this is kind of same as U.S. government issuing too many bonds. I think this is really critical points that we have to kind of protect. Otherwise, this system is not going to work.
I think that centralization is a real risk. I think, in my opinion, the risk can best be understood by looking at historically the centralization of gold. So when gold was decentralized and currencies were backed by a gold standard, it's a lot harder for the government to just print money out of thin air and then use that to do evil things, right? They would have to somehow collect that money through taxation. And if you look at when currencies were backed by gold, taxes were much lower. You know, it's very hard for you to have this ever-growing public sector of people that you're just printing money to do these jobs that maybe society doesn't want. If you're just doing it by like asking for donations or by trying to collect taxes, right? So if we think about what could happen, like let's say the US said tomorrow, we will denominate like US dollars in Bitcoin or vice versa, right? If Bitcoin became like a reserve asset of the US government and they started acquiring all of the Bitcoin, and then I think other governments would do the same thing because they want to acquire USD or they want to trade in this currency. They would see the signal of support for this currency. So I think governments would try to, you know, centralize the control of that. And then eventually we would reinvent the existing fractional reserve banking system. And so I think if you can, as a user, own your Bitcoin and people cannot take it away from you and you can possess it yourself, this is the power that you have, right, over your own money. If it just all centralizes with governments, I think we would just repeat history.
Yeah, but that sounds like it's going to happen. It sounds like it's going to be going in the direction of centralization in China, in other countries, including in Vietnam. I think the government in Vietnam has recognized the fact that Vietnam is one of the biggest crypto trading markets in the world. I don't know if that's true or not. I have asked a lot of people to validate that information, but I haven't seen any concrete validation of the fact that Vietnam is one of the biggest crypto trading markets in the world. Now, so it's I think it's inevitable that governments are heading in that direction, trying to bring it in, to control it, and to basically centralize it, like I said. So, is there a way, either technologically, or through different potential business models that you recognize that would skirt around that issue or allow for the markets to avoid losing out some of the main features, including the revealing of their identity and
So I think we covered it earlier, right? Basically, the problem is distribution. We need as many people as possible to be holding Bitcoin. Right now, the Bitcoin base layer is not very scalable. It does 7 transactions per second. Solana is a very good candidate as a way to basically distribute Bitcoin. If we have scalable solutions to distribute Bitcoin to as many people as possible, then we decentralize ownership, and then it becomes kind of a more level playing field.
what would you have in mind, practically speaking? What sort of model that would allow for scalability?
So basically like bridging solutions from Bitcoin to Solana or any other scalable blockchain platform, especially permissionless bridging, that would be like the gold standard, or scaling the Bitcoin-based layer somehow. That has historically been very controversial, but if we just increase the block sizes, it would be possible to send a lot more Bitcoin transactions, and then a lot more people could own Bitcoin.
Now, in terms of technology, because Satoshi-san has invented Bitcoin, can there be another Satoshi-san in the future, someone else who would come up with something else? Now, I don't understand the cryptography enough to dissect it further in terms of whether it's as best as it can get.
Yeah.
There is nothing else in this world that can be technologically more advanced to allow for the same features as Bitcoin.
I think it's like saying, is uranium better than gold? Maybe. It has more use case. It can be used as energy or whatever, right? Maybe it's better. So there's always substitute goods, right? If the market decides Bitcoin is the winner, it's the winner. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think technologically better thingy, I don't think it really needs to. I think we just have to have a good incentive structure to keep the system. And then that's what Bitcoin really has, I think, at this moment. So yeah, that's something I rather focus.
Last question in terms of your prediction for the future. In my view, in my personal view, I think there is room for Bitcoin as well as gold and maybe some USDT, USDC to coexist as a quote-unquote reserve currency. So it could be a combination of all three currencies, or it can be a situation where they can interact with each other in terms of different business models, the same way that we talked about. Would you have the same prediction, or would you say that it's going to be something drastically different?
I would say that there's going to be more USD than there was yesterday, tomorrow, like no matter what. And I would say that Bitcoin is going to keep being adopted and used, whether by retail or by big institutions, we'll see. And I think that anyone using gold or Bitcoin as a reserve currency, it's a much better alternative to the current situation. So hopefully that's what happens.
Joe, what's your...
Yeah, I'm aligned with Dean. And also now for the financial institutions, Bitcoin is really the new financial products that they want to sell. And then also we all know that the U.S. government is kind of like it is done in terms of the financial system, and we all like have a very big incentive aligned to pursue with the Bitcoin. I think so. This is what's gonna happen.
It sounds like Bitcoin is the way to go. Well, we ran out of time. Thank you for your participation, Dean and Joe, and thank you, Joe, for stepping in at the last minute.
Happy. Thank you.
Thanks.